Hey there, ghouls and gals, and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, hi, my name is Hillary, and if you are returning and you are a returning subscriber, oh my gosh, you're amazing. I don't really know what's been happening out of late. I've been having a lot of trouble with my gear, like my camera, my SD card, my computer, and it all happened ever since I've gotten my computer. Maybe I'm just really bad at technology, but I think as of right now, I'll probably be doing one video a week. Hopefully I'll be able to get that up once I finally figure out how to deal with tech stuff. Anyway, aside from all that, tonight we are going to be covering urban legend of the Skinwalker, and I also have like a Skinwalker story that creeped me out and I'm going to read it to you. So let's just dive right on into that. So this specific urban legend is the Arizona Skinwalkers. And then the story I'm going to tell you, I don't believe takes place in Arizona, but Skinwalker's a skinwalker, right? They're all creepy. As long as it scares you. I'm going to read the urban legend to you guys first, and then I'm going to read you the story, and then we should maybe talk about it after, because it's probably going to give you the heebie-jeebies as much as it gives me. It's easy to feel uneasy while driving through the desolate desert roads of Arizona, especially at night. And particularly so when you hear a short burst of taps on your window while cruising at 60 miles per hour and turn to see a shape-shifting, mutilated, half-human creature responsible for the high-speed interruption. Relax, it's only trying to rip the flesh off your bones. The legend is so ingrained in Arizona culture that when a Navajo woman was found brutally murdered in Flagstaff, the accused killer's defense in court was that the attack could have been perpetrated by a skinwalker. There's even a defined and well-documented portion of the state known as Skinwalker Ranch, where you are most likely to see one of the creatures. Not that you'd actually want to. Where it came from. The Skinwalkers, like so many ancient American urban legends, have roots in Native American folklore. While it's fairly hard to gather specific details, as speaking of potentially sinister legends, it's seriously taboo in Navajo culture. It is understood that non-Navajos refer to the Skinwalkers are witch doctors who have become an evil reflection of everything the Navajo Nation values. Basically, they are men who've transformed into malevolent, murderous creatures and have no qualms using their spiritual powers to kill. Navajo medicine men are trained to learn both good and evil aspects of their power, and skinwalkers are those who have turned to the dark side. It's all very Star Wars, and frankly, it's terrifying. So that's the urban legend, and basically what a skinwalker is it's, I don't know if it's a spirit or it's supposed to be some sort of witch that has turned evil, and they feed on people. So I think they can shapeshift, so you could see them as an animal, or you can see them as this gray-looking human that's crawling on its back towards you, and its main goal is to eat you and consume you. And then it can kind of adopt your characteristics. It can use your voice. So I've heard a lot of stories about skinwalkers screaming or saying something in a recognizable voice, trying to lure you out to where they are. And oh god, I have chills on my arms. So sorry, I've heard a lot of stories about they try to mimic a voice of someone that you recognize and lure you to where they are so that they can consume you and steal your face or your look-alike. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen Skinwalker Ranch. I think it's currently a show, and it's a whole part of Arizona that they're supposed to live on, and the Navajo forbid people from going there because if you go there, you're going with a gun so that you can kill. That's how much they believe it. Even in the last thing that I had read you, there was a guy convicted of murder, and his scapegoat was a skinwalker did it? Skinwalker did it. Frankly, if I hear a voice, I don't even care if it's someone I recognize coming from the woods, no, I'm not, no, sorry, you're dead, bye. A skinwalker is something that I for sure do not think that anyone should be messing around with. They seem to be super duper evil. So the story that I'm going to read to you is supposed to be a true story of a skinwalker encounter, and it's pretty long, but I guess we'll just see if it creeps you out as much as it creeps me out. When I was 15, I lived in a little house on a beautiful piece of property in Northern California. Pine trees 60 feet high, grapevines and strawberries growing wild everywhere you looked. My parents bought the place when I was 13, but when we first got there, it was yet to have a building or running water or electricity. We started clearing out some trees to make room for where our home would be built. We knew it would be a ton of work, but it was going to be well worth it. Unfortunately, what we didn't predict is that I had a horrible sensitivity to poison oak, which also thrived. I had to stay with my grandma for nearly a year before enough was cleared out for me to stay there. My mom and dad built me a little 10-foot by 12-foot house with a second floor and a ladder going up to my patio. I was very excited and grateful because I had not had my own room for a little over a year. Now suddenly I had a little cottage all to myself. I felt like the luckiest 14-year-old girl who ever lived. Anyway, over time I built up a tolerance for poison oak. In the beginning it was bad, like really bad. Every time I got it, as in crusting, oozy, yellow blisters from head to toe, swelling up all over, even inside my mouth and throat. Gross, scabby, don't want to leave the house because I looked like a leper kind of bad. But after a year or so of being around it, I got to where I really only reacted to it like most people do. An annoying rash that goes away in a week or two. So I would explore the woods. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The trees were like castles. The creek was like a river. And by, I started to find strange things. First pits, holes, 10 to 15 feet across and about 5 feet deep. I got down inside one and started digging. I found a treasure trove of antique glass, jugs, and bottles. Some of them even had liquid inside, and they had lids rusted on. One was a medicine bottle with what I can only describe as black, rotten capsule-looking things. One was molasses, but most were whiskey. I smiled, so our place used to belong to a really bad alcoholic. I found other things, an old belt buckle, a few huge bullet casings, a few gold pans, and little bottles used to store gold flakes, and a big yellow sign that said Acme Beer in red letters, which, by the way, I know was a brewery that was based out of San Francisco, but managed to survive a huge fire, only to be put under by the passing of the Prohibition laws. That kind of puts into perspective how old this stuff actually was. Late 1800s, early 1900s to ballpark it. My friends and I would stay up late telling spooky stories about the old drunk gold miner who used to live there. I made up the name John Hatcher. It sounded authentic and a little spooky. We'd change it up every time we added a new girl to our sleepovers. Soon, he was an axe-wielding demon-summoning cannibal who brutally murdered his wife and children and buried them in the woods. He sold his soul for eternal life, but his body is rotten and decaying. He limps through the woods, hungry for flesh of teenage girls. We would tell these stories so much, it sort of became an urban legend. And when I'd have someone over, I loved showing them my morbid museum of John Hatcher memorabilia. My friends and I decided one weekend to pitch a tent out in the woods. We did our ritual of telling scary stories and then got onto the topic of what really did happen here. If there could possibly be ghosts, or if the spirits of the hypothetically murdered Native Americans could have be driven mad, or drunken gold mining predecessors. The newspaper records in the local library didn't go back that far enough to tell us, and I didn't really know where else to look for clues. So we started being cocky and saying we wished to see something supernatural. We worked ourselves into such a frenzy that we would start hearing the oddest noises in the woods. Surely it was our deluded teenage brains playing tricks on us. But I swear to you on my mother's life, we heard what sounded like the most blood-curdling laughter coming from deeper into the woods. And at this point, I already have chills. Ugh. Not towards the main house where my parents could have been watching TV, the old parts of the woods. Places it was hard to get to because it was so overgrown with thorn bushes. We clasped our hands over our mouths and shushed each other to block out the sounds of our panicked breathing, and there it was again, clear as the day, the most sinister laughing I have ever heard. It was high-pitched, not like a woman, but a man laughing so hard he was almost crying. It echoed through the trees. It was so loud. Then we heard leaves crunching and footsteps out in the woods circling our tent, closer and closer. My friend suggested we wait for it to circle back to the opposite side of the tent and then make a run for the house. It was really only less than a quarter mile away, but dodging branches in the pitch black was a tricky business. And what's more, I brought up the question, could our physical bodies outrun something that clearly didn't have a physical form? Just because it sounds like it's 50 feet away doesn't mean it's not able to appear in front of our tent in a split second. The inevitability led to an even less pleasant question. If it's a spirit, can it touch us? No sooner had those words left my friend's lips, but the side of our tent was touched by something. The sound was a gentle scratch that reminded me of a zipper. Surprisingly, none of us screamed at this. We were all suddenly dead silent. No crickets, nothing. It's okay. I finally got the words to squeeze from my dry throat. It's probably someone messing with us. Just then, what looked like a very long finger poked the side of the tent, poked slowly and firmly so that the fabric caved in towards us. We all stared at it for a second. I reached out and touched it and pushed it back. It felt less like a finger and more like a dog's nose, sort of cold and wettish. At least I imagined it was wet, though the tent was waterproof, so I can't be sure. After sitting huddled together in the center of the tent for what felt like hours, the crickets came back and it sounded more like the woods normally sounded at night. We decided to take our lantern and slowly and calmly and very respectfully walk back to the house. We taunted something out in those woods and seriously pissed it off. We talked about it a few times since then. We all stand by what we saw and heard, even 10 years later. But the weirdest thing happened a few weeks after that. One of the girls present that night, let's call her Amy, was at my house for the weekend. The fuzz of our creepy campout had died down a bit, and things were back to business as usual. It's amazing how easy it is to dismiss something when you are too scared to dwell on it. The sun was setting. It was the time of day where everything outside had a blue hue to it. Amy and I wanted to watch a movie, so we were coming out of my little cottage and crossing just a few feet to my parents' trailer, which was where the TV was. What I'm about to tell you happened so fast, it was over in a matter of few seconds. I heard her gasp and glance over, and on the ground was what looked like a skinny, pale as death, naked man. He was positioned face down with his arms and legs spread out. When we looked at him, he pushed up a few inches off the ground and started crawling towards us like a lizard. His head bent back in an unnatural way. His mouth and his eyes were black holes. His mouth opened ridiculously wide, and he was hissing as he crawled. I am not very strong, but Amy was pretty small back then. She was only 14, and I kid you not, I picked her up with one arm, got inside the trailer with the speed I didn't know I had. I pulled the door shut behind us, and I held the doorknob and braced my foot against the door jamb and pulled as hard as I could. We screamed for help at the top of our lungs, like our heads were on fire. I soon felt forceful pulling on the door, and we screamed even louder. Suddenly, the door was yanked from my grasp. It was my dad. We tried to explain what we saw, but a pasty naked man on the ground was hardly something my parents considered supernatural. To them, it was more likely that it was a junkie or a mentally ill person, or us just watching too much scary stuff on TV. My dad got his gun and did a thorough inspection of the area, but didn't find so much as a footprint. Amy and I had a falling out years later and don't talk anymore, but sometimes I wish I could just talk to someone who saw what I saw that day. It looks similar to the creature I used to cover on this book. I have done research since that has led me to believe that what I saw was a skinwalker. They can shapeshift into many different animals, some even take forms of people that they kill. Supposedly, they were Native American witches who sold their souls for some sort of supernatural power, but when they don't feed on the souls of the living for too long, their true form starts to show. That, I think, might be what we saw. It looked hungry. It didn't look like a spirit. It looked fleshy and solid. My feeling at the time was that it wanted to eat us. Even now as an adult, when I walk outside in the evening to feed my dog, I look into the woods and it really feels like something is looking back. I will never forget the thing, and no one convinced me that I didn't see it. God, okay, so that's the end of the story. I know it was long, and I hope that you guys stayed with me that long, but I have chills. I cannot imagine seeing that. It's not like it's even a full spirit. It's supposed to look so real. And oh God, I feel like it's dangerous. Like I don't like the idea of it at all. And I feel like relatively I'm a pretty brave person, but something about skinwalkers is like, do not mess with that. Don't. So with that, I'm gonna say that this is the end of my video. Are any of you guys willing to mess with a skinwalker? Let me know if you are. Feel free to like and subscribe or leave a comment down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.